All right, everybody. I am here with Ellen McLain, opera singer, voice actress, voice instructor. She's done a lot of things, most well known as the voice of GLaDOS from the Portal series. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you, Ellen, for taking time out of your schedule to be here. I greatly appreciate it.
Andy, you are so welcome, and I am honored that you wanted to speak with me.
Well, thank you. Um, so, for the audience sake, do you think you could give us a little bit of a background? So, how did you start from, or I guess I should say, where did you start?
I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and as a little girl, I always loved singing. I sang all the time. And I started begging my mother for voice lessons when I was about 10. And she actually, called up some voice teachers in town, and everybody said, no, 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 she's too young. She's too young. So when I was in the eighth grade, spring of the eighth grade, I was 13. And I was in, some little local, voice competition thing, for grade school students. And one of the people that my mother had called, Shirley Courtner, my first voice teacher, Shirley was the judge. I hadn't studied with her yet, but my mother, after the competition, went up to her and said, Miss Courtner, do you think my daughter is now, old enough to take voice lessons? And Shirley Courtner said, yes, she is, and I will take her as a student. So I started studying with Shirley Courtner, and a wonderful person. She was a wonderful person. And she was teaching at a new school in Nashville called the Blair Academy of Music. Now, interestingly, through the years, Blair grew and grew and grew, and it has been taken over by Vanderbilt University. And so it's the Blair School of Music now at Vanderbilt University. But when I was there, the first year it started up, and it was a house on a street. But, they were offering voice lessons and piano lessons, and I think, of course, violin, trumpet, because I remember Rolf Smedvig, who was the principal trumpet player in the Nashville Symphony. Interestingly, he ended up in Seattle, as did I. Now, of course, he was a much older person than me, because he was, when I was still in grade school, he was in the Nashville Symphony. But I have never forgotten Rolf Smedvig. One, because that's a fabulous name, and he was a fabulous trumpet player, and also he was very handsome. So that's my beginning as a voice person, but it was all through singing. And then, of course, I went to the North Carolina School of the Arts, which is also now, part of the University of North Carolina system. And then I went to New England Conservatory in Boston and finished my bachelor's degree in music and got a master's degree in music because one of the board members had given me a scholarship, and I knew that she would keep giving me money if I stayed. So Mrs. H.S. Payson Rowe, God rest her soul, was a very generous little old lady. And she, like I am now, she was then. And she paid for my master's degree in music, in opera. So it was music and opera all the way. And when I met my husband in Europe, John Patrick Lowry, the voice of the sniper, after we got married, we went back to Bloomington, Indiana, where he worked on a doctorate in music composition. And we both got hired at the radio station, Andy,
Ah!
the NPR, station, WFIU, and we were both DJs. It was a classical music and news station then. And John and I spun LPs. Remember those? We would take the arm and drop it, and we would, announce the, conductors and composers. And, this is how East Coast I was. So Gerard Schwartz was the music director and conductor of Seattle Symphony for many, many years, and when John and I moved here in 1989, but I'd never heard of him. So of course I saw that name and I said, yes, Gerard Schwartz is conducting the Seattle Symphony. And the head of the station came to me once I had the music on, and he said, he's American and his name's Gerard Schwartz. So all of my wonderful mistakes in being a DJ. There was another time I was reading a news article, and it was about the Indiana basketball team. And of course, Bobby Knight, the famous Bobby Knight, was their coach then. But I was reading this news announcement, and I said, a player's name, and I said, this player made an offensive move. And I read it like he had offended somebody.
Oh, no.
So you can tell I know a lot about sports. So of course, I was a DJ on that station for 2 years, and of course, what I remember about it were my big goofs, my big faux pas. Made an offensive move.
Oh.
So that was sort of my first thing, and both my husband and I made commercials for WFIU, weekend radio from Cleveland, and anything that we were going to air on WFIU, the channel had us make announcements for it because, we were both performers and actors, and, it just fell into place. So then when we moved in 1989 out to Seattle, we worked at KUOW, which is the NPR affiliate here in the Seattle area. And that, of course, is based at the University of Washington. And we were disc jockeys there too. Now, it's mainly a news channel now, but at the time, it was classical music. And finally, we just were dealing with CDs, not LPs. We were playing CDs, which was so much easier, because the wonderful thing about a CD is it always told you exactly how long it was. So you knew how much time you had before you had to do a station identification. So, and then, when we got here, of course, my husband had a voice demo and he started to do voiceover work, Goody's headache powders. He did one for that, and in the mid-90s, he started to do computer games like Championship Bass Fishing and Spy Fox Breakfast Cereal. But it wasn't until 2002 that he convinced me to get a voice demo, because I said, no, they won't use me. They won't like my voice. They don't use women, and I was wrong, which I often am, Andy.
I feel that. I feel that. Like I I have a thought about something, and it's just nope.
But do you know what my motto is? I
What's
didn't
that?
have it then, but my motto now is say yes to life. Say yes to life. And
That's
one of my recent projects was a production of the play Night Mother with my young friend Sheila Houlihan, and we streamed it on Twitch. All because of her. She's the young person. She's a youngster, and she said, "Oh, Ellen, we should do this." We rehearsed it during the pandemic, through Zoom calls. So we adapted the play for the pandemic. The mother is a nursing facility, and the daughter is in the family home, and they're on a Zoom call. And Sheila produced it, and we streamed it live on September 24th, and it's still available on Twitch. It's just Night Mother on Twitch. And at this point, we've gotten 32,000 views.
wow.
So I'm very proud of our play.
I'll have to check it out. I I mean, I saw you promoting it when I was initially looking at Twitter, but um I haven't seen it yet. I'll have to give that a look when I get the chance.
It's a very serious play, and we did it to promote mental health assistance. We want people. A lot of people have been struggling with mental health issues, long before the pandemic,
Oh
but
yeah.
certainly during the pandemic too. And we wanted to do something to support mental health initiatives. So that's what we did. And we did have a discussion panel after the play that is also on the same site, Night Mother on Twitch.
All right. Um so after you got your masters, did you did you start with opera performances, just going
Yeah,
up on stage and traveling and all that?
yes, I did. I was hired by some small companies, Opera New England, which was the touring arm of Boston Opera. Sarah Caldwell's company. She was quite famous in opera circles as a conductor and director. And then also, I worked for a company in Seattle called Boston Summer Opera Theater, and did a production of The Marriage of Figaro. And so I hung around Boston for another year with with a break. Right after I got my master's, I went down to Nashville and I worked at Opryland. Have you
Ooh.
ever heard of Opryland?
I can't say that I have actually.
Well, it closed long before your time, but it was an amusement park in Nashville, Tennessee, that was built around musical performances. It had rides and food and, everything that an amusement park has, but it also had live shows.
Ooh.
And right out of school, I got hired and I worked in Nashville. But then, after the job was over, I went back to Boston and hung out for a year. And then I moved to New York. In the fall of 1979, I moved to New York with my good friend, Mary Stout, who is still my good friend and a professional actress. And in the first year we were in New York, we had 4 different sublet apartments.
Ooh.
Because, we didn't have enough money to get a lease. And so we just kept, when you're in New York as an actor or performer, you go out of town a lot. And people advertise as like, I'm going to be out of town for 3 months. So we'd take that apartment. And then, somebody else. So we moved 4 times the first year we lived there.
Oh, wow.
I mean, you do all sorts of stuff. And I was auditioning, but mainly for music theater. Because opera auditions in New York, there are some open calls, but it's mainly through management companies. And I didn't have management when I first got there, but I wanted to perform and I wanted to audition. So I went to open calls for music theater, and I started to get hired doing music theater. And that's how I got my first equity contract, which was a national tour of My Fair Lady with Rex Harrison. And you probably don't know who that is either.
No, I don't.
He was a British actor, and he was the first person who played Henry Higgins in Lerner and Loewe's musical My Fair Lady, which came out in, Julie Andrews was in that. Julie Andrews was the first Eliza Doolittle. So there was a revival of that show in 1980, and they got Rex to do it, and an English actress named Cheryl Kennedy, and I was hired for the chorus. And that was my first Actors Equity Association job. And I did My Fair Lady for 16 months. I'm getting married in the morning. Ding dong, bells are gonna chime. Of course, it's higher than that because I was one of the high sopranos. They hired me because I had good high notes, and I could dance. So I toured the country in My Fair Lady.
Yeah, that sounds like it was a lot of fun back then.
It was. It was.
Did you do any worldwide travel, or was it mostly in the States?
Well, in 1984, I got hired for a European tour of Showboat, the Jerome Kern Oscar Hammerstein musical, and I was hired as the ingenue. I was the beautiful young thing, again with good high notes. And we toured Europe, and that's where I met my husband, because he was in the orchestra playing guitar and banjo. And he subsequently became the understudy for one of the principal roles, and he actually went on in Palermo, Italy. And as he likes to say, his first professional appearance as an actor was in Palermo, Italy, telling jokes to an audience that did not speak English.
Oh. Oh no.
So he didn't get any laughs.
Oh.
But that's where we met. And, a whirlwind European courtship. But, 2 years later, we got married. So, but we fell in love on the Showboat tour, and happily ever after, really. We've lived happily ever after.
I'd say so. So, was there a favorite performance or trip that you had while you were doing musical theater?
Well, I really enjoy every show I do. But, highlights. One is that production of Showboat. That's a highlight. But also here in Seattle, I did a touring production of La Boheme in the role of Mimi. And that is a highlight. I loved doing that. And I also did a tour of Arthur Miller's play Death of a Salesman, much later in my life. And I played Linda Lohman, and that was a highlight because that is a great play, just a great play. So a lot of times in my bios, I say that, Ellen has played roles all the way from Mimi in La Boheme to Linda Lohman in A Death of a Salesman. So I've been very fortunate to have a varied performing career, because I've gotten to do very satisfying work in opera and very satisfying work in theater and very satisfying work in voiceover. Because I have to say that the writers for the Portal games, Eric Wolpaw, Jay Pinkerton, Chet Balasek, are wonderful writers. And then, of course, the music of Jonathan Colton and Mike Moraski that I've gotten to sing in the Portal series is wonderful. So I'm a lucky girl.
And I just over across my research and going into the voice field, I can definitely attest to the fact that variety will definitely help a voice acting career.
Well, yes, but I think any career in the arts, the more versatile we are, the more often we will work.
So kind of moving on to when you started doing voices for video games in particular, well, maybe not in particular, but I don't even want to word this. So after John got or convinced you to do a voice demo, how did working at Valve get started, or how'd you kind of transition into that realm?
Well, audition. My first voiceover jobs weren't for, Valve or computer games, but I can't remember. So the first one I did was Half-Life 2, and I voice Overwatch, and I didn't really know what it was for, Andy. And they told me that, they sort of wanted sort of a British, sort of Scottish accent. So my accent is it's more British than Scottish, but it's kind of an amorphous accent. And I didn't really know, that I'm sure they told me it was for a game at some point when I went into the studio to record, but I didn't really know what computer games were. My computer game knowledge sort of stopped with Pac-Man, in the early aughts, the early 2000s. It's like, well, I know what Pac-Man is, but I didn't understand how the technology had progressed and how computer games had really become sort of movies that, someone can move through and affect the action. I didn't know any of that. I do now, but then I didn't.
Yeah, I can definitely say that there's so much progression in video game technology these days. It is insane.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
One of my favorite examples that I bring up is Final Fantasy VII Remake, because I played Final Fantasy VII. I want to say it was about 2 to 3 years ago. And then the remake finally came out, and I'm like, this feels so much more like a movie, like an interactive movie. And that was for the better, because Final Fantasy VII was always renowned for its story. And I feel like the remake just amplified that up to 11. It just makes me amazed at how far this technology has come.
Yes, and there's no stopping it. Because of course the video game industry for many years has outpaced the film industry, outpaced them in budget and output and technological change. And it's very interesting. Have you seen the movie Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds?
I have not, but I've seen the trailers for it.
Oh, Andy, you have to see it. You have to see it, because us video game aficionados, it's a laugh riot, because there's so many memes that we're familiar with, and when they bring in the portals, my husband and I laughed and applauded. We're sitting in a movie theater here in Seattle, the Majestic Bay. The Majestic Bay movie theater is our favorite movie theater in Seattle. And we were sitting in the Majestic Bay laughing and applauding. And I thought, this is great that a movie is using memes from video games, and everybody knows them, and everybody was laughing. It's just such a great movie, because the part that Ryan Reynolds plays is he's a background character in this game. And so Free Guy has two meanings. He becomes free, and then also he has to be freed. And it's a wonderful movie. I really recommend it, Andy.
I'll have to check it out. I don't know if it's on DVD yet, but if it is, then
Well, I think it's on streaming services, but I couldn't tell you which one.
It's probably on at least one.
Yeah,
Probably like YouTube movies or something.
you will laugh.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out. So when you got the role of GLaDOS and the turrets and the Curiosity Core and basically all the roles he ended up getting in the Portal games, did they have you speak in a monotone sort of voice before they applied a synthesizer to it, or how did the recording process for GLaDOS and those kinds of characters work?
Well, for the first game, for the audition, they sent each auditioner the same sound file, which was of a computer generated voice. And they wanted us to sound as close to that computer generated voice as we could. And I guess I did it, because I got hired. Now, the reason that they had to hire an actor to do this is because the computer generated voice was copyrighted, and they would have had to have paid this other company lots of money, which they didn't want to do. And hiring an actor was cheaper. So I got that gig. The other thing is as GLaDOS goes crazy in the first game, different things happen to her voice, and she really starts saying really crazy stuff, like the cake recipe and all sorts of stuff. And it really wasn't anything that the computer generated voice could have handled with any change in emotional life. Then when GLaDOS loses the morality core, they wanted me to change my voice. Well, I didn't find out about this until I was in the studio. And so they said, oh, Ellen, just try some stuff. And I just tried some stuff and, ended up with what I ended up with. And So my GLaDOS reads, whether I was like the computer generated voice or after losing the morality core, it's just my voice. And then they synthesize my voice afterward. But I do have a certain read for GLaDOS that, I've gotten very comfortable with, but my voice is always synthesized. And when Guillermo del Toro wanted to use the GLaDOS voice for Pacific Rim, he called up Gabe Newell at Valve and said, is that okay? I'm a big Portal fan. Can I use the GLaDOS voice? And Gabe said, yes. And that means you have to hire Ellen McLain because she's the GLaDOS voice. So I got an email from my agent saying, would you be interested in working on a film with Guillermo del Toro? Yes. It certainly got my attention. And it was like, yes, I would certainly do this. And he's a genius. He's a genius, and he's a wonderful person. And I loved working on Pacific Rim with Guillermo del Toro. And Bill Van Buren, who was the producer for the Portal games, went with me to the recording session up here in Seattle. Del Toro was down at a studio in LA, but Bill Van Buren went with me to Clatter and Din of this recording studio here in Seattle. And he made sure that I was doing the, classic GLaDOS read. And he told Del Toro that, Valve would share with them the exact equation for how they processed my voice. Now, ultimately, Del Toro, so in the trailers for Pacific Rim, that's processed like GLaDOS. But in the movie, Del Toro decided to make her sound just a little bit more human. So the processing isn't exactly the same as the Portal, as Portal 2. But Valve was very nice to help me with that project, so I could make some money and get another gig.
Well, that's great that they were able to help you with that, because jumping from a video game over to a big movie like Pacific Rim, I mean, yeah, the voices are similar, but the scale is much bigger.
Well, I was nervous, so I certainly felt backed up by Valve and helped a great deal by everyone. Valve is a wonderful company, and it's really a company of individual creators, and they are all very, very creative and wonderful people. And Gabe Newell made it happen, so he gets my thanks over and over again.
He certainly gets my thanks too, because I love the Portal games, and I'm actually still playing through the Half-Life series. I just started getting into it.
Oh, well, it's the Portal games are puzzle games, and nobody dies.
Right.
But of course, in the Half-Life universe, that's not the case. My husband, John Patrick Lowry, who voices all of the citizens in Half-Life, all the male citizens. Our friend Mary Kay Irvin voices the female citizens. But John likes to play Half-Life, and it's so funny to, sit there and watch him play and hear his voice, and hear my voice trying to get him killed.
Yeah, it's the same way I feel just whenever I record anything in general. Like, I go back and watch it. If it's like a video or something, I go back and watch it. And I'm like, oh, it's me. I don't like hearing me. That's
Well, but Andy, I don't always recognize myself. I've done so much over the years that, my husband and I will listen to, I've done a lot of radio drama, and
Mhm.
my husband and I will be listening to a radio drama uh, piece, and it's like, is that me? And it's like, I don't have any memory of doing that. And he'll say, yeah, that's you, Ellen. So that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. Um, so you kind of touched on this briefly before we got started. You didn't write the songs for the Portal games, right? You just lent your voice to those.
Well, Jonathan Colton wrote Still Alive, and he wrote Want You Gone. And then for the, what is it? Why am I spacing on this?
Is
You
because
Wouldn't Know. He wrote You Wouldn't Know for
it's Lego Dimensions, if I
Lego.
recall correctly. That game had a Portal expansion to it.
But he wrote Want You Gone. You Wouldn't Know. He wrote You Wouldn't Know for the Lego Dimensions. 3 wonderful songs. And then Mike Moraski wrote the turret opera for Portal 2. And I sing a lot in the background in Portal 2, and Mike wrote all of that. But of course, the turret opera, I made up the words just on the spot, because I do speak Italian, not well, but I have a working knowledge of Italian. So Mike just had me, I just made up Italian. And one of the pieces that he wrote, he calls Potatoes Lament.
Oh, I
And
love that song.
that I made up fake Latin. So I'm singing Latin in Potatoes Lament.
It's I just find it funny because whenever I do my show, my parents or family members that listen, they say, I don't know what you're talking about, but it sounds great. But then I think I've mentioned potatoes as she ends up being called on the show before, and it's all I can imagine those just looking at me like, what are you talking about? There's a computer and a potato.
Wait, just a minute. I have to show you something.
Really? Ah,
A young friend did this needle point for me. I'm going to get it up here so everyone can see it.
oh, that's amazing.
Of course, it says because I'm a potato. So here is a needle point of potatoes. There she is.
Oh, that is incredible.
Isn't that great? I have it on the wall in our studio.
Oh. It's
We've
probably
got
one of
we've gotten some wonderful creations from people over the years. I have a wonderful handmade companion cube, a
oh,
cuddly companion cube
oh.
someone made for me. And we have some wonderful artwork. And I have a tiny TF2 administrator and a tiny TF2 sniper. And they really are just about that big. And someone made them for us. And I love those.
It's probably one of my favorite lines in Portal 2. Well, alongside Cave Johnson, just Cave Johnson is hilarious. But how are you holding up? Because I'm a potato.
Yes, yes. But you're right about Cave Johnson. J.K. Simmons is a wonderful actor. And Stephen Merchant as Wheatley. He's a wonderful actor. And what was so nice is, they recorded J.K. Simmons down in LA, and the Valve folks went to London to record Stephen Merchant. So I actually got to work off of their recordings. So
Oh,
as Carolyn, when I'm talking to Cave Johnson, I actually heard his recordings. And when GLaDOS is talking to Wheatley, I heard his recordings. So I've never met them in person, but I've gotten to act off of their recorded voices, which was a great joy.
that that's something we do a lot nowadays. Actually, is just remote work, and
Yes.
lots and lots of remote work. um, let's see. I'm losing my train of thought.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. Was there anything I think it's wonderful, Andy, that you are in communication and media, if I'm remembering correctly,
Yep.
because I think that will open up possibilities for you in your professional career. And I don't know if your listeners know this, but you are, a young person, college age, and you're just starting out. And when I was in school, I had no idea what field I'd go into. I mean, video games didn't even exist. So for everyone, when you're in your 20s, you don't know what you're going to be doing later in life, because change is happening so fast, and we sort of have to be prepared to make leaps of faith and just say yes to life and jump in.
I agree entirely. It's always been kind of my motto, is just roll with the punches. That's what I always tell myself whenever I'm down or something, or my friends are down. Sometimes I just have to tell them, roll with the punches, and whatever happens, happens.
Well, we use our God-given gifts, and we try to make the world better. With whatever we do, we try to make the world better.
And I definitely agree with that. It's um I regained my train of thought. Going into the realm of radio dramas. So when did you start those? When you were a DJ, or when did you start with the radio dramas?
Uh, Good question. I did a little, one-off gig with a wonderful man named Jim French. And Jim French was a radio personality down in LA, but then also back up here in Seattle. And he had a company called Jim French's Imagination Theater. Now, when voice demos were still on cassette tape, I had one rehearsal with Jim because he was also a pianist. And we did a gig for the radio enthusiasts of Puget Sound. And I sang, three jazz standards. I can't even remember what yet at this point. But Jim played and I sang. And because I knew who he was, I took one of John's voice demo recordings, one of his little cassettes, and I took it to Jim French and I said, you know, my husband has a wonderful voice and he's been doing some voiceover. And if you can spare the time, would you please listen to his voice demo? Well, Jim did, and he hired him immediately. And John became the announcer for Jim's radio series called The Further Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And when the actor playing Sherlock, when John Gilbert retired, my John took over the role of Sherlock Holmes. And so through Jim French's Imagination Theater, John as Sherlock Holmes and Lawrence Albert as Dr. Watson and Lee Posh as Mrs. Hudson and Rick May as Inspector Lestrade, those recurring characters recorded all of the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle stories and novellas. And I think there's something like 66 or something. And I think of Jim's Imagination Theater as the only company that has recorded all the stories with the same recurring characters. And I recorded different characters in that series. I recorded Irene Adler, and I think she's in at least a couple. And I'm also in their 4-part series, The Hound of the Baskervilles, as the housekeeper. And recently, I've taken over the role of Mrs. Hudson in The Further Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, because Lee Posh was quite an elderly lady, and in the intervening years, she did pass away. And so when Jim French died, Jim's heirs, his son and daughter, let my husband, John, and Lawrence Albert take over the company. They reincorporated under the name Oral Vision, but it's still known as Jim French's Imagination Theater. And we have listeners all over the world. We have radio stations, you know, here in Seattle, in Virginia, in Colorado, in Australia, places you can hear them in England. And the website for that company is harrynile.com. HARRYNILE, like the river, harrynile.com. Because Harry Nile is a gumshoe detective series that Jim started years ago, and John and Larry's company, they're still producing them. So Sherlock's are being produced, and Harry Nile's being produced, and we're going to have a 3-part series based on J.K. Lovecraft's writing, come out during the Halloween season, called Nemesis. And I'm in that one. So if listeners go to harrynile.com, they can hear all about our radio dramas that Oral Vision is producing.
That's another thing I'll have to check out alongside Free Man.
Yes, Free Guy.
Free Guy, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So was portraying a character in a video game that much different from portraying a character over the radio? Or is it mostly the same process?
It's all voice acting. Because, you know, I've done a lot of stage work. And of course, when you're on stage, you have the entire instrument. You know, you have your voice, you have your face, your arms, hands, feet, legs, everything. But when you are doing voiceover, you only have your voice and your imagination. And that's the important thing, because you have to put yourself into another place, time, situation, character, and create a world just with your voice. So I love voice acting. Um, and I think I'm better at it now than I was when I started out, just because, I'm more experienced. But it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to do, to create a reality with just your sound.
And I agree with that. I don't listen to a lot of radio dramas, but I have listened to a few in the past, and they just do such a wonderful job of immersing you into another world, essentially, using only audio, because the rest is up to your imagination. As you said, that's the important part.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so losing my train of thought again. I'm a forgetful boy.
Well, I'm forgetful.
Yeah, don't feel too bad. I'm forgetful too. So, were there any favorite radio dramas that you did over your career?
Well, I'm very proud of the work that, Jim French's Imagination Theater does. And I've been, I've been a character in the Sherlock Holmes series. I've also been characters and recurring characters in the Harry Nile detective series. Um, I remember in Harry Nile, I once played this old cat lady, and all she really cared about was her cat. And I can't even remember the nature of the crime that was committed that Harry had to, figure out. But I remember that character. And I had a lot of fun working on this recent J.K. Lovecraft series written by M.J. Eliot. M.J. Eliot is the principal writer for Imagination Theater, and he does wonderful work. He's incredibly prolific. I mean, he writes Sherlock Holmes stuff. He writes Harry Nile. He writes the new series Murder in the Murdochs, which is a detective agency, a mother and daughter detective agency starring Cynthia Lauren Tweez as Maxine Murdoch and Andy Albert as Piper Murdoch, the daughter, and they have a detective agency together. And that's a wonderful series, wonderful series. So I'm just, what, like I said before, Andy, I always enjoy new projects, and I like what I'm working on at the time.
Fair enough. It's There's something that my media professors always tell me. It's that if you wouldn't listen to it or read it, then why do it at all? And honestly, that's why I do my show. I like video games. I like talking about them. I like listening to people talking about them. It's it's a point that they've nailed into my head, and subsequently I've been trying to nail into other people's heads if they want to get into this sort of field.
Well, I think it's important for everyone to be able to do what they love. And perhaps you're not doing what you love in your survival job, but I recommend that everybody make some time in their day to do things that they love.
I wholeheartedly agree. So you mentioned before we started that you were a voice instructor. Now, did you
Yes.
did you do more of like singing instruction or more of acting instruction? Because um, at least here at Olivet, there's a or it's not a course hosted here. It's something called Acadium that one of my professors recently informed me about, and there's all sorts of acting classes, just from voice and diction to just moving, actually using your body and moving around and things like that. But what kind of voice instruction did you do?
Well, primarily, I'm a teacher of singing. Now, I have worked with people, I have coached people on public speaking. I've not done a lot of that, but I have done it, and uh, and I've also coached people on their acting auditions. I will coach someone who's preparing a monologue for an audition. But mainly, what I do is I teach people how to sing. And I've been teaching voice since 1987 because, while I was at Indiana University with John, as I said, I was working on WFIU, but I needed another way to make money as well. And John said, "Well, why don't you teach voice?" And I said, "Oh, I can't teach anybody how to sing. You know, how would I do that?" And he said, "Well, Ellen, you know more than they do." So I taught voice in Indiana, in Bloomington, Indiana, for $10 an hour. That's what I charged. And I had a lot of the drama students study singing with me because at the time, if they took voice lessons through the university, it was like $60 an hour, which
Ooh.
isn't much now, but then. And so they could study with me, who had a master's degree in voice from New England Conservatory, for $10 an hour. So I had lots of students. So, the 2 years that we were in Indiana, I taught people how to sing, and that's where I started. And then we moved to Seattle, and I just kept teaching. And so I'm still teaching singing, and I love to do it. I love to do it.
And do you teach at just one particular location, or do you go to several places, or do you do it through Zoom like what we're
No,
doing right now? Or
I've always taught privately, um, but also I taught at Cornish College of the Arts for 5 years in the late '90s. And then for 10 years, I taught at an after school program called Kids Stage, which was developed by a local theater in the area, Village Theater. And Village Theater's Kids Stage is an after school program for young people all the way up through high school. And I have taught there so long that some of my very young students are now working professionally. And I'm very proud that many of the people who have studied singing with me now sing professionally. And I think it makes a lot of sense to study with somebody who has a professional career, because my feeling is if I can do it, you can do it. And yes, I do teach over Zoom now. I am teaching over Zoom now. And what I found, while it does have time lag difficulties, it's also made my voice students very independent on the keyboard, because either keyboard or piano, they have to play their own vocalises. and they have to be able to play at least the melody of the song repertory that I assign them. And they all can. They all can. And so that's one boon from teaching over Zoom, is it's made my students more musically independent. Because before that, I would play, in the lesson. Now they have to play.
And did they just kind of learn that on their own with sheet music, or did you teach them?
One of my students, I actually sent a beginning piano book to, and I have taken her through this beginning piano series, figuring out finger position and fingering and all sorts of things, and that's been a big help. Another of my students already played the piano, and I'm just encouraging her to do so.
I actually grew up, at least on my mom's side of the family. My grandma plays the organ nowadays. My mom, she doesn't really play piano as much as she used to, but I kind of gained that musical inclinement from my family. But I don't know how, but I ended up learning just by ear. Like I
Sure.
just cannot read sheet music for the life of me. Like I got a basic understanding of it from my middle school choir classes, but outside of that, it's just been, oh, listen to a song like 20 times and eventually I'll get it. And it's people always look at me like, how do you do that? I look at them like I just listen. And I I poke my fingers at the keys and see if it sounds right.
Well, that's a good talent to have, Andy. Uh, and and having an ear like that will also help your work in voiceover, because we voiceover performers, we have to listen. We have to listen well. So that will come in handy.
It's kind of ironic because I mentioned before I'm a very forgetful boy, but at the same time I have a musically inclined ear, so I don't the brain is a confusing thing. It's a very confusing thing.
Yes, yes.
That's actually just about all the questions that I have, at least the main ones. So as we kind of start to wrap up here, do you have any advice for aspiring voice artists, singers, that sort of people for the audience out there?
Well, as I said before, Andy, I think as performers and creative people, the more versatile we are, uh, the more opportunity we'll have to work. And in my estimation, the important word in voice actor is actor. It's not just people who have good voices, who have pleasant voices. It's people who know how to act. So anyone who's interested in voice acting needs to get into an acting class. Number one, get into an acting class. And then everything else you do, I've sung in church choirs. As I told you earlier, I'm 68 years old. I have been singing in church choirs since I was 5 years old.
Whew.
And I started being hired to sing in church choirs when I was in college, because my wonderful voice teacher at New England Conservatory, Barbara Wallace, who is alive and well in Vermont in her 90s, she's wonderful. But she got me an audition at a church in Boston, and I sang there for 4 years in a double quartet. And boy, did that help my singing and help my musicianship and my sight reading. I could really hold a piece of music and just read it. And I have had church jobs paying church jobs since I was in college. And as I said, being versatile. So to make a living in the arts, I've taught voice, I've sung in churches, I've sung high holy days at synagogues. I've done voiceover, I've done radio drama. I have appeared as historic characters. I remember one gig I did, I had to appear as Eleanor Roosevelt. And so I did that. And I worked for a singing telegram company, and I have done everything under the sun that was even vaguely related to performing. So be versatile, say yes to life. All information and education is useful. Go for it and do things that you love. That's my advice.
And I sound like a broken record, but I completely agree.
Oh, good.
So there is one more thing before we wrap up for real this time. I don't have a synthesizer on me or anything, but would you be able to do some GLaDOS before we wrapped up?
All right. So this is what I sound like in the studio before my voice is processed. We're a lot alike, you and I. You tested me. I tested you. You killed me. Oh, wait a minute. I guess I haven't killed you yet. Well, food for thought. You monster.
Oh my goodness. If I get if it's possible, I'll see if I can kind of edit that, and like when I'm cutting this down for the actual show, I'll see if I can edit that and make it sound similar somehow. But that was
whatever you want, Anne.
that was amazing. Thank you very much.
Well, you're so welcome. And you are so welcome. Thank you for your flexibility. And thank you for meeting with me today. And I hope the rest of your weekend is wonderful. And I'm going to see a production of La Boheme tonight at Seattle Opera.
Ooh.
So I'm going to go off and get ready for the opera. Going to the opera.
Sounds good. Do you have any other questions for me before we wrap up?
I don't think so, but you know how to get in touch with me. And once you finally have posted the interview, etc., I'd love for you to send me a link.
Yeah, certainly. What I can do, actually, I'll send you a link to the WOCR website. So if you happen to be able to listen to it live, it'll happen because the show airs every Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time to 2 p.m. So if you happen to listen,
3 to 5 my time.
Yeah. And once it gets uploaded to YouTube, which it'll probably be not long after it premieres live, then I'll go ahead and send you the link to that too.
Okay, that's great, Andy. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to talk to me. It's greatly appreciated.
Well, you are very welcome. You are an interesting, intelligent, young voice talent, and I'm very pleased to meet you.
It was great meeting you, Ellen.
Well, okay. Well, I'm going to sign off now, Andy.
All right. All right. Have a good rest of your weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.